Hello to all my dear followers. I'd like to welcome you to a new chapter of What if Naruto trains to become a Genjutsu master alongside Kurenai? At the top right of the screen, I've left a card with a playlist showing all the chapters of this fanfic in order. Please, I ask for your likes and comments so I can bring you more chapters. Without further ado, enjoy.
Naruto and Shino walked into the hospital. Looking around, they saw that there were a few nurses milling about and talking as the information desk had two sitting nurses. No patients were in the waiting room. The two had headed over here immediately after leaving the Forest of Death. Naruto because Sakura had informed him that Kakashi had left to take care of something, which was code for he was checking up on Sasuke, and Shino because he wished to see how Hinata was doing. The two genin walked up to the information desk. "Could you please tell me where Hyuga Hinata and Uchiha Sasuke's room is?" Naruto said as Shino stood next to him. The information desk attendants both grabbed clipboards and flipped through a few sheets before the one on the right said, "Hyuga Hinata is in room 325. She is allowed visitors." She informed them. Shino and Naruto nodded to each other. Shino walking off towards the stairs as Naruto waited a bit longer. "Uchiha Sasuke-sama is not being allowed visitors," the desk clerk told him finally. Naruto quirked an eyebrow. "Why not?" he asked curiously. The attendant frowned. "Actually, I can't say. They didn't tell us," she clarified when Naruto opened his mouth to speak again. Naruto sighed and nodded, turning to head up the stairs when he saw Kakashi walking towards him, his book oddly absent from his hands as he walked towards him. Naruto moved closer to his sensei. "I have a request, Kakashi-sensei," Naruto said. Kakashi's eye widened in surprise, before it narrowed. "Okay, but I have a question before you request anything from me," he said seriously, his lazy tone gone from his usually apathetic voice. Naruto nodded in response, genuinely curious as to what his sensei might ask. "I know that you have speed that you have been hiding from the team, but what else have you been forgetting to tell us about?" Naruto gained a slightly surprised look at the question, but it was prevalent to Kakashi's place as the teacher of his team. The fact that Naruto had skills that he had hidden even from Kakashi spoke volumes to other teachers towards Kakashi's mettle as a teacher and as a professional because he was the captain of said team. "Some genjutsu that Kurenai-sensei taught me along with my speed is the only things I have trained," Naruto said after a brief pause. "And my chakra control is now on par with Sasuke's, in relation to our chakra pools at least." He finished with a nod of his head. "Genjutsu?" Kakashi blinked in confusion. "Yes, genjutsu. I figured out a way to bypass my huge chakra pool to contain my illusions so I can cast them. It's what I used to defeat those thugs that attacked Tsunade's house back during the wave mission," he replied. "Anyways, could you train me in some ninjutsu for the finals? My genjutsu is decent, but I think I'm going to need some destructive power to face my opponents, since I don't have an actual taijutsu style," he asked without leaving Kakashi any time to process what he said about genjutsu. Kakashi seemed to blink and answered in a bit of a haze as if his mind was working to catch up to what had been told to him. Sorry Naruto-kun, but I had already found someone who will supervise your training. I have some other business to take care of and don't have the time to look after you," he said. Naruto closed his mouth, his lips forming into a very tight line as he looked at Kakashi, who kept Naruto's gaze. The two stared each other down for almost 2 minutes in the middle of a corridor before Kakashi looked away and Naruto's eyes gained the icy look they had back when he was first hurt by his team. "You plan on training Sasuke exclusively, is that it?" Naruto asked in a quiet voice. Kakashi didn't answer. "I see. So, who was it that is supposedly supposed to train me in your place?" he asked, his voice cold and emotionless as he stared up at Kakashi. "Oh, someone much more reliable than me. Ebisu-sensei," Kakashi said with an eye smile as if that would make up for his own lack of being able to help his student. Naruto scoffed. "You mean the closet pervert who is training Konohamaru-kun?" he asked. "No thanks. I'll see you around, Kakashi," he said as he turned and headed back out of the hospital. "Wait a minute, Naruto," Kakashi said. Naruto turned slightly, sending one eye to look at Kakashi. "What did you mean those thugs by Tsunade's place?" he said in slight confusion. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. "If you weren't so lazy, you would know what I am talking about," he said with quiet resignation, as if he had finally given up on having Kakashi doing anything worthwhile for him. Since you were supposed to read everyone's report before turning your own mission report in, right? Naruto said as he turned and continued out of the hospital, passing Ebisu on his way towards the door. Naruto walked out of the hospital, his mood somber, his heart hurt, and his mind roiling with anger both at himself and at his former sensei. Naruto looked up at the sky as thunder rumbled out overhead. The clouds were thick and gray as the faint light from what appeared to be a twilight sun tinged the world in pink. Naruto let a small smile spread across his face as he moved forward, knowing the best place to let out his frustrations. Scene break. Naruto walked step by step up a cliff face as the heavens roared their impending deluge. His small smile had slipped into a tight-lipped grin that had spread across his face as he walked through the village and reached the cliff he was not scaling with chakra. He had wanted to talk to Kurenai or Shikamaru but decided against it. Kurenai was worried enough with her own team and she still gave him mixed feelings because of the kiss she had given him, while Shikamaru was definitely at home, resting with his family. While Naruto knew he was always welcome, he didn't want to intrude upon them too much. They deserved to revel in the fact Shikamaru had passed the second test unharmed and alive. Of course, this thought also brought to light the fact that he didn't have anyone close enough to revel in that fact himself. But, as he thought this, he reached the top of the cliff and sighed as he sat down upon the smooth rock, looking out over Konoha as the last rays of blocked sunlight disappeared. Naruto felt the raindrops begin. He smiled brightly. Naruto had always loved the rain. It cleaned the streets of the dust of the days between. It washed the grim off of the roofs of his village. It cooled the whole area off as the usual humidity lightened briefly while the water fell from the heavens. It gave the grass a fresh scent and finally, it was always quiet when it rained. Now, Naruto didn't mean that it was quiet in a literal sense, obviously, since the rain brought quite the noise when it fell hard enough. No, Naruto knew that, when it rained, the only people who would be present in the streets would be the ANBU, and because of that, when it was raining, the whole world stood still as Naruto walked the streets of his home village all alone, with no one to accompany him. Yet that wasn't something that bothered him during the rain. It was the fact that Naruto knew he could walk in the rain within his village and finally get to walk through his own home without ever having someone glare at him for a reason he never understood. So, while everyone else might despise the rain, Naruto loved it, for the peace and serenity, for the ending that it brought, along with the new beginning that it heralded when the droplets finally stopped descending from the heavens. And so, Naruto sat on top of the Hokage monument, watching the lights within Konoha slowly turn on and light up the darkened sky with rainbows reflected from the drops of rain. His smile bright as he ignored the emotional pain that had been inflicted upon him and allowed himself to simply let go. Very poetic, brat, Kyubi remarked with a yawn. Naruto didn't lose his smile. What is it you want, Kyubi? Naruto asked, his tone light and his countenance speaking of a being at peace as his hair became soaked from the downpour and his clothes stuck to his skin. Freedom, Kyubi stated simply. Naruto shook his head. You know the pact, Naruto thought in reply, which caused the great beast to grumble. The pact was seriously in Kyubi's favor, really. The Kyubi just didn't like having made one with its container. But, I won't deny you this feeling. You have my permission to link your senses with mine until I decide to cut them off, Naruto thought. Kyubi's silence was absolute as the beast seemed to contemplate Naruto's offer for a few seconds before Naruto felt the malevolent chakra of the beast spike slightly within him and the Kyubi take deep whiffs of air, its impressive lungs pounding within his mind as his ears took in the sound of the pouring deluge. Naruto settled comfortably upon the stone, sending himself into a slightly meditative state. As a result of this, Naruto's bloodline spread out, encompassing many times the normal size he usually held. He could barely sense the edge of Konoha from where he was sensing, and Naruto smiled. That meant he was getting stronger. So the night wore on, Naruto sitting beneath the deluge with his new pact partner connected with him and allowing all of his frustrations to drain from his body. Scene break. Naruto opened his eyes, his meditative state disappearing as he looked up, noticing the sun high in the sky despite how dark it had seemed in his receptive state. Naruto figured it was closing in on lunchtime. He frowned slightly as he thought back to his sensei and who he had worked to pawn him off on. That man was probably a good teacher, but he doubted that Ebisu would work well with himself. He knew the man held a grudge against him for some reason. Whether it was because of his defeat at Naruto's hands or the fact he held the Kyubi remained to be seen. Naruto stood, stretching his body out and sighing in satisfaction as he felt his bones snap back into place. All of a sudden, Naruto spun about, his hair whipping in the wind as he pulled a kunai from his pouch and glared at the man now standing not 5 feet from him. Naruto's eyes narrowed just as Kyuubi spoke. Not an ordinary ninja, is he? If he could sneak up on you, that is. Naruto took a few moments to gauge his, for the moment, opponent. At first glance, the man seemed to be a frail old man, walking with a cane whom was almost wrapped in bandages as those bandages covered his forehead, wrapping around his head and covering his right eye, though his shaggy black hair fell down from above the bandage wrappings. The man had black eyes along with a X-shaped scar on his chin. His brown robe covered most of his body. The only skin being seen besides his face was the left hand which rested upon his cane. Naruto's eyes narrowed as his head swelled from the amount of chakra signatures that he felt from this guy. Much like Orochimaru, this guy's chakra was something unique to himself, but it was not evil or convoluted like Orochimaru's or Gaara's. It was in combination of different chakras, as if there were multiple bodies standing where that man was now. There has to be over a dozen, Naruto thought, though his only outward sign of surprise was the tightening of his hand on his kunai as Kyuubi spoke again. 13 to be exact, and you must not fight this man. He will end your miserable excuse of a life if you attempt to do so, Kyuubi said before growing silent. Who are you? Naruto asked as he looked at the man. The man's single eye blazed into Naruto's own icy blue eyes with a piercing ability Naruto had thought only his Gigi possessed, but the man did not hold the gaze for long as he spoke. My name is Shimura Danzo, and I have a proposition for you, Uzumaki Naruto, he said. Naruto didn't respond, prompting this Danzo to continue. I know that you are in the finals to the Chunin exams that are occurring 1 month from now, he said, to which Naruto mentally rolled his eyes at. That wasn't exactly hidden knowledge. I also know that you have been getting secret lessons in Genjutsu since a month after your graduation to Genin, and are proficient enough in them to have already gained a moniker and threat level worthy of a Konoha shinobi. He added, to Naruto's slightly hardened look. How do you know all this? Naruto asked. I also know that Hatake Kakashi has refused to train you for the finals and that you are now in need of a ninjutsu instructor for the finals. Danzo continued as if he hadn't heard Naruto's question. Naruto's eyes narrowed as his body tensed. My proposition is that I provide you with the proper ninjutsu training. Naruto's body relaxed slightly as he looked warily at the man in front of him, his mind churning with the possibilities. What's in it for you? Naruto asked. Danzo didn't even blink as he answered. Nothing. Naruto shook his head. There is always a catch. I may be dumb, Danzo-san, but I am not stupid. What do you get out of helping me train? He asked. Danzo let a wry smile spread across his face. Very astute, Naruto-kun, especially for someone your age, but you are a Genjutsu master aspirant, are you not? He asked rhetorically. Naruto didn't like how this man seemed to have answers to every question about him. In answer to your question, I gain a powerful tool for the protection and benefit of Konohagakure and its current allies. Danzo replied, making Naruto blink in slight confusion. My only stipulation with this training is no one can ever learn where you learned these jutsu. Danzo said. Naruto thought for a moment, conferring with Kyuubi. The old geezer is lying about something, whether it is from his reasons behind the training or for the training, is unclear. You ninjins are some deceitful bitches, are you not? Kyuubi said. Naruto mentally nodded and returned his eyes to Danzo. I think I will have to pass on your generous offer. Gigi pays too much attention to me for me to learn in secret, and if I suddenly disappear I am sure he would grow frantic. Naruto answered carefully, his body now relaxed in front of Danzo. Very well. Then may I suggest, you forget that this meeting ever happened, Naruto-kun, Danzo said as he trailed off suggestively and disappeared inside a shunshin. Naruto sighed and ran a hand through his hair yet again. The day wasn't even started and he already had problems appearing. Scene break. Just as he was about to set out, an ANBU appeared in front of him. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Ohio Yugao-chan, how have you been? He asked as he looked at the purple-haired swords mistress with a cat mask on in front of him. Yugao smiled behind her mask. I'm fine, Naruto-kun, but Hokage-sama wishes to see you, she said as she held out her hand. Naruto sighed before taking her hand and feeling the two of them being transported via shunshin into the Hokage's office. The Hokage smiled as he saw Naruto, and Yugao appear in front of him. "Ah, Naruto-kun, nice to see you," he said, then turned to Yugao. "Thank you, Nico-chan, that will be all." Yugao bowed and disappeared into the shadows. The Hokage then turned a smiling face back to Naruto. "First of all, I would like to congratulate you on a job well done during the Chunin exams so far, Naruto-kun," he said with happiness and pride in his voice, though Naruto only understood the happiness. "Also, I would like to say that I felt touched by your speech about the deceased of the village and that it was a true testament to the will of fire that you carry within you," he said with a slight bow of his head to his adopted grandson. Naruto smiled. "Thanks, GG," he said happily. The Sandaime nodded his head again and slowly his smile slipped from his face. "Unfortunately, Naruto-kun, I brought you here for more than just the pleasure of your company and to congratulate you," he said, his tone lacking the happiness and pride as he looked at Naruto, who then adopted a more serious look. Satisfied, the Sandaime continued, "I am worried about this new look of yours, more specifically, the relation it might have to the seal of the Kyuubi," he said. Naruto's eyes narrowed. "What exactly do you mean?" he asked. Now, the Sandaime knew he was in dangerous territory, for his relationship with Naruto was still strained from his indiscretion about the Kyuubi, but he knew that being completely truthful to him now would help to bridge that gap somewhat. "If your new look is because of something my former student did to tamper with the seal, then we will need to check the seal for its strength and possibly reinforce it if necessary. I cannot allow you to be walking around with a damaged seal and become a potential risk to the village, Naruto-kun." Naruto stared into Sarutobi's eyes, the two locking eyes as they battled out a contest of wills. It wasn't long before Naruto's eyes softened and he nodded. "Okay, Gigi. You can check the seal, but I want all of the ANBU except Nico-chan to leave," he said quietly. Sarutobi smiled and waved the rest of the ANBU out of the room, Nico coming back from the shadows as the walls flashed a bright blue from the Hokage activating seals designed to protect the room from eavesdroppers. "Why did you let me stay, Naruto-kun?" Yugao asked from behind her mask. Naruto turned his eyes to her mask and smiled slightly. "I trust you," he said simply as he turned back to his Gigi and lifted his shirt off, causing Yugao to blush under her mask as she saw his perfectly sculpted muscles. The Hokage chuckled as he moved forward and Yugao saw the smile on the perverted geezer's face, which caused her to accidentally cause the old man to trip over her foot for laughing at her reaction. Naruto chuckled as he watched the Hokage glare up at his subordinate, who had turned her head away before he stood back up and then began examining the seal with what limited knowledge of Fuinjutsu he had. The Sandaime took close to 10 minutes, observing the seal before he stood up and allowed Naruto to pull his shirt back down as he walked back to his desk and sat back down. "It's fine, Naruto-kun. Thank you for allowing me to take a look," he said. Naruto nodded his head respectfully. "If that is all, GG?" he asked. The Hokage nodded his head. "Then I shall head to one of the Jounin lounge to see if any ninjutsu specialists could help me out with my training," he said as he turned and began to leave for a lounge specifically for ninja. They were spread out in Konoha, lounges which were fortified and protected by ANBU captains so that shinobi could feel at rest for a short while. Many high-ranking and well-known shinobi would frequent these places to take a break from their chaotic and danger-filled lives. He was stopped by the Hokage's voice. "Why would you need to seek someone else out, Naruto-kun? Kakashi-kun is your sensei. Even if Kurenai-chan teaches you Genjutsu, Kakashi-kun is more than capable to teach you ninjutsu," he said with concern laced in his voice. Naruto didn't even turn around as he answered, "Yes, he can," he said quietly, trailing off for a slight pause. "That was why I asked him to train me for the finals." "Would you like to know what he said to me, Hokage-sama?" Naruto asked, a bit annoyed that the head of the shinobi would be unawares or simply ignore Kakashi's teaching methods as, he assumed, his Gigi had done so far. He heard his Gigi suck in his breath and continued. "He said that he had already prepared a substitute for him to teach me in his stead, since he had other business to take care of and didn't have the time to look after me," Naruto said with a hint of derision in his voice. "The replacement he arranged for me is someone who doesn't even like me. So I am stuck with finding my own teacher for the next month since Kurenai-sensei is undoubtedly working with Shino." The Hokage's and Yugao's shocked looks, though you couldn't see Yugao's, were the only answer Naruto got as he went to leave the room once more. "Naruto-kun," the Sandaime said, sorrow in his voice. Please go to the hot springs on the north end of town. I believe there are many good shinobi who frequent the place, he said. Naruto's slight nod was his gesture of thanks as Naruto left the room. The Hokage turned to Yugao. Get me Kakashi. If he refuses, burn his Ika, he said. Yugao bowed and disappeared from the office, leaving a fuming Hokage. 1. Scene break. Naruto walked out of the Hokage tower. Looking up at the sun, he noticed it was close to lunchtime and that his clothes were dried nicely from the night before. He wondered for a moment how good the fabric of his clothes must be if, when his clothes were naturally dried, they felt as if they were normal and not scratchy or uncomfortable as most fabrics would be. Quit daydreaming and get something to eat, you little brat. Then head to the hot springs, Kyuubi said from within its cage. Naruto paused as he went to move, his head cocking to the side as he thought about how Kyuubi had spoken. Something not sitting right with it within Naruto. After standing there for about 5 more seconds, Naruto shrugged his shoulders, telling himself it was a figment of his imagination as he moved to eat his lunch. Naruto ate a lunch of dango from a stand near the hot springs his Gigi had sent him to. Naruto was grateful for the helpful hint of that he was certain. He was just sad that it had taken so long for his Gigi to take an active role in helping him. Brushing that thought aside, Naruto paid the stand for his food and made his way to the hot springs. Once there, however, Naruto suddenly realized that he had no way to talk to any of the people here. He couldn't just sit outside and ask every single person who comes out to help him. Thinking for a moment, he decided to enter the hot spring and enjoy a soak in the waters as he thought up the best way to ask a completely random stranger for help with his jutsu. Scene break. Naruto walked into the hot springs, his body language confident, but those who knew him well enough could tell he was expecting to be rebuffed. Surprisingly, the receptionist took his payment with little hassle and Naruto was quickly ushered away so the people entering behind him could pay. Naruto brightened slightly as he walked down the hallway, entering the men's side for the baths and proceeded to strip down. Naruto wrapped a towel around his waist as he dropped his boxers and put all of his clothes into his little box, provided by the hot spring. He quietly stepped into the open-air hot spring. He sat down on a little stool, filling a bucket with water from the tap, and began to scrub his body furiously, paying close attention to the dirt on his body as he wanted to enjoy this since he didn't get the chance very often. Naruto learned just how difficult his hair could be with this washing. Since he had never had long hair, he didn't realize how long it was going to take him to properly clean and groom his hair. Though he did consider cutting it, Naruto would have to wait until someone he trusted could accomplish the task. Shortly thereafter, Naruto was completely clean and splashed his body free of soap suds with his bucket of water. Naruto then stood, walking over to the warm water. He quickly slipped into and under the water with a quiet sigh of relief as he allowed himself to relax into his hot bath. Naruto kept his eyes closed, enjoying the soaking with all of his senses to better his experience. It wasn't long, at least to Naruto, that his perfect bath of relaxation was ruined by a particularly loud giggle along with the scribbling of what sounded like a pen to paper. Naruto initially wrote it off and tried to ignore these odd giggles that would float to him from across the hot springs until he could stand it no longer. His eyebrow twitching madly, Naruto opened his eyes to spy a broad-set man with long white hair, much like his own golden locks, staring at what appeared to be the wooden fence and occasionally looking down at something in his hands, where that scribbling noise was coming from. Naruto frowned, looking at the man and wondering what he could be doing when Kyuubi spoke, startling Naruto slightly. Go take a peek through the wall and see what is so captivating, it suggested. Again, Naruto felt something was off in Kyuubi's voice, but he couldn't quite place what it was. Shrugging, Naruto went over to the fence, away from the scribbling white-haired man, and proceeded to look for a hole in the fence. There can't be anything too interesting. The only thing around here is some buildings and a small forest out back. Nothing so good as what he seemed excited about. Naruto thought to himself with curiosity. Of course, he was forgetting one major thing. Naruto took a few more steps, noticing a small crack in the boards of the fence. Naruto stepped up to it and curiously put his eye up next to it, looking through the crack at the opposite side. Naruto was sorely disappointed when smoke met his initial sight. He sighed. What the hell? There is just some steam from our hot spring, he thought to himself. It was then, however, that a particularly strong ray of sunlight hit the mist, parting it enough for Naruto to see the forbidden fruit that the white-haired man was apparently giggling about. Naruto's eyes grew wide as he looked upon naked women. The women were unnoticing of the two sets of male eyes set upon their luscious bodies. As luck would have it, Naruto and that man seemed to have picked a bunch of well-endowed women to spy upon. Naruto's eyes darted to and fro from each of the girls' heavenly bodies as blood from his body rushed to a specific place, hidden only by a meager towel. His lower head quickly swelled to size as Naruto witnessed something he had only seen twice before in his life: naked women. Even as Naruto's brain began to fry itself on the image of the women in front of him, his brain seemingly burned the curves of their bodies into his memory. The way their breasts jiggled with each step and how their derrieres all shook with the sway of their hips as they walked to and from the hot spring's relaxing water. He idly noted that for each girl, there was hair down by their downstairs and that their breasts all had those little pink things that he had seen on Kurenai and his own body. His finishing thought was not even made by himself. Ah, my first sight of the fairer sex in almost 50 years. It has been too long. Kyuubi sighed from inside its cage. With this being said, Naruto passed out right by the fence, blood having poured from his nose, as he tinted the hot spring with his perverted blood. Scene break. Naruto woke mere minutes later. Hearing the man's giggling going full blast, he groaned. "What hit me?" he asked until he sat up in the water and looked down, glaring at his own body for what it was doing. "And what the hell is this?" he thought angrily as he looked at his own body. "I didn't go to sleep that long," he thought. "You really don't know what that is?" Kyuubi asked from its cage. Naruto's confused cock of his head was not the answer the Kyuubi wanted. It roared with laughter nonetheless. "That is so poetic, brat. Not even knowing your own body and understanding yourself enough to know this reaction. By Yami, these ninjas were harsh on you," it said as its laughter died down to chuckles. "Then what is it?" Naruto demanded angrily. The Kyuubi chuckled a few more times, too amused by the situation to even be angry back at the brat's anger. "Not my place to tell you, brat. This is going to be an interesting pact," Kyuubi said as it faded back into its cage. Naruto's fuming face as he stewed in what the Kyuubi was hiding from him was odd, but he snapped back to the present with a whip of his head towards the giggling and scribbling that the white-haired man was doing. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto thought back to what had happened and his eyes widened as he remembered each of the girls he had accidentally peeped on. He blushed and stuffed his fingers up his nose to stop the nosebleed he felt come on as recalled their bodies. He shivered and took a shuddering breath before leveling his glare on Jiraiya. "Pervert," he thought to himself as he set about the punishment he decided on the man. Naruto snuck up behind the man, his stealth skills allowing him to get within striking distance of the man. Hearing him giggle again as he looked down, Naruto struck, his hands in a ram sign. Naruto ran forward from his close proximity and spoke his attack. "Kanahegakure Haiden Taijutsu Oji. Senin Garoshi," he said as he thrust his fingers forward, attempting to poke the man in the ass. Unfortunately, Naruto didn't manage to complete his attack. Just as Naruto leaped, the man, without turning around, suddenly jumped up a bit, thrusting his hand down. A puff of smoke covered Naruto before he felt a crushing weight appeared on top of Naruto. Naruto gave out a strangled cry of surprise as the smoke cleared and, on top of him, was a toad about the size of a horse. Naruto's slightly widened eyes showed he knew who this man was as the man sat upon the toad. His book still in his hand as the hand that had summoned the toad quickly grabbed the pen now coming back down from a toss up into the air and proceeded writing in his book for a few seconds before sighing with contentment and looking down after having placed his book away. "Oh, someone got caught. I just thought that was an annoying fly that tried to get to me. Sorry about that," the man said with a smile and a twinkle in his eyes as he looked down at Naruto. Naruto's eye twitched. "It's fine, Jiraiya of the Densetsu no Sannin," Naruto replied, to which Jiraiya's happy demeanor completely disappeared as he looked down at the boy trapped under his toad. "So you know who I am?" he asked dangerously, before he suddenly smiled again. "Guess my books are getting really popular, aren't they?" he said happily. "Which ones did you like the most? Haha?" Jiraiya asked as he smiled down at the boy. Naruto treated him to a confused expression, his head cocked to the side. "What are you talking about? What books?" Naruto asked. Jiraiya held a shocked look. "Why, this one, of course," Jiraiya said as he held up a Ica Paradise First Edition in his hand. Naruto's eye twitched dangerously as the book reminded him of someone he desperately wanted to forget about currently. His memories flashed as he remembered his former sensei reading that exact book while, seemingly, ignoring his students. I mean, that is why I'm here, Jiraiya continued, oblivious to Naruto's darkening mood. I need inspiration to write better and research is the best way, he said with a smile. Naruto's eyes gained a dark gleam as he spoke. Your research is nothing more than peeping, you damn pervert, Naruto said loudly. If you have time to be peeping, you should be training the future generations of Konoha like you did the Yondaime. Naruto finished, hoping he might have earned himself a powerful jutsu master. Jiraiya's eyes gained a glint that Naruto hadn't seen before. He shivered as the gleam reminded him of Orochimaru, the same glint that had appeared before Naruto had used Kyuubi's power to distract the Sannin. The gleam which told Naruto he had just picked a fight with someone who was powerful, knew it, and, worst of all, could kick his ass without lifting so much as a finger. Don't you be trying to lecture me, you damn gaki. Especially from behind some damn genjutsu, he said, all traces of merriment gone from his voice as he looked over to where the real Naruto was sitting, a rock a few paces away, watching his clone and Jiraiya converse from behind a camouflage genjutsu. Naruto instantly dispelled his clone as his camouflage genjutsu faded, leaving the two to stare down each other, Jiraiya's gray eyes gleaming with the power and knowledge of someone twice Naruto's mental age. Naruto staring back with the hardened will that he had built over the years living within the walls of Konoha. Interesting gaki you are, Uzumaki Naruto. Konoha's blade of illusion. Jiraiya finally spoke. Naruto nodded, a small smile coming to his face. A pleasure to meet the great Mayabo Kagama-san. I have read much about you, Naruto said as he bowed his head in greeting, though it did forget to mention your perverted ways. He added, causing Jiraiya's slight frown to turn into a smile. I'm not a pervert, he said vehemently, shaking his head. I'm a super pervert, he proclaimed loudly and, if Naruto was right, proudly. Naruto's sweat dropped as he looked at the strongest shinobi of the village. He was sure he was stronger than his Gigi since his Gigi was really too old to be fighting anyways. However, the face that Jiraiya was making now seemed to negate that feeling of power. His hands were facing outwards, as if groping invisible things. His eyes and mouth lifted in a ridiculous expression of lewdness, and his eyes were glazed over as if he were experiencing something truly amazing that only he could feel or see. Naruto frowned. He disliked perverts almost as much as Kurenai. Of course, that was because he didn't like the thought of some girl hitting him for thinking or doing something perverted. He did get a sense that it was wrong to do such things as peeping and the like, but he never really had an urge to do such things, so Naruto just naturally developed a disliking of perverts through Sakura's abusive attitude towards anything perverted back in the academy, at least anything she thought was perversion. That one-time deal with Kurenai was the lone exception to this. Well, good luck with your research, even if I think all the girls are probably gone by now, Naruto said, causing Jiraiya to shrug his shoulders. I got what I needed, he said simply as Naruto turned to leave. Then I hope we meet again, Jiraiya-senin. I have things to do in Jounin to seek out, he said as he began to walk away, then muttered to himself, damn Gigi sending me over here only to meet the most perverted person ever. Even if he would make a great ninjutsu teacher, he's a pervert of the highest level, even higher than Gigi or Kakashi. Naruto muttered to himself. So, you know Kakashi, huh? Jiraiya said from right next to Naruto, heading to the changing rooms with the young man. Naruto cast a glance over to the man but otherwise ignored his question. Who is your Gigi? Jiraiya asked, only curiosity in his voice. But Naruto knew this man was much more powerful than he appeared or even felt. This man was also the only person capable of suppressing his chakra enough so that Naruto's sensor bloodline couldn't pick up a trace of the man's chakra beyond a civilian level, even while standing right next to him. Sandaime Gigi, Naruto answered as Jiraiya stopped, leaning against a wall so Naruto could change back into his clothes in peace. Sarutobi-sensei, huh? Jiraiya whispered to himself, remaining silent as the rustle of clothes filled the empty changing room. A few moments later, Jiraiya spoke again. Why do you need a ninjutsu teacher? And who is your Jounin sensei? He asked. Naruto pulled his shirt on. Looking at Jiraiya scrupulously, he answered, I'm in the finals of the Chunin exams and, though my genjutsu is strong, I think it would be a trump card to have some ninjutsu that people won't expect after reading my bingo book entry. Besides, I have the chakra to spare, Naruto said. Jiraiya nodded, thinking of the young man's chakra reserves. As for my Jounin-sensei, Naruto trailed off, his eyes gaining their usual frostiness. On paper, my Jounin-sensei is Hatake Kakashi. In reality, I am my own teacher in anything not related to Genjutsu. For that, I have Yuhi Kurenai-sensei. Naruto answered. Jiraiya's slightly surprised look was his response as Naruto looked at Jiraiya for the first time taking in his full appearance. Jiraiya is tall with hair much like Naruto's, except it is tied together into a ponytail, but also with two shoulder-length bangs that framed both sides of his face. He had red lines that ran down from his eyes to the bottom of his cheeks and wore a horned forehead protector with the kanji for oil, which exemplified his affiliation with Mount Mayaboku. He had on a green short shirt kimono and matching pants, under which he wore mesh armor that showed out of the sleeves and legs of his outfit. His outfit was complemented with a simple black belt, some traditional Japanese get a strap to his feet, a red cloak with two simple yellow circles on the front of his shoulders, and what Naruto assumed was the toad summoning scroll on his back. Jiraiya then frowned. What do you mean you are your own teacher? The reason for genin to have their team is to learn teamwork, but it is also so they have the proper education provided by their Jounin-sensei, he said. Naruto scoffed. Kakashi teaches me nothing. The skills I have currently are either a result of my own actions or those of Kurenai-sensei's. I have asked him to teach me before, but he's chosen to focus his attentions on Uchiha Sasuke. So, I'm my own teacher for ninjutsu, taijutsu, and anything else I may decide to try to learn, he explained. Jiraiya looked at Naruto, an odd gleam in his eye as he looked Naruto up and down. Naruto stiffened slightly, feeling on edge for some reason. I'm tired of those stares you Sannin give me, Naruto muttered. You Sannin? Jiraiya asked, his eyes gleaming again. Naruto sighed and ran a hand through his hair. I've met two Sannin, and all within 5 days of each other. Your former teammate, Orochimaru, attacked my team and I when we were participating in the second part of the Chunin exams. He tried to put a seal on top of the cubies, but I tricked him long enough for the ANBU to force him to retreat, Naruto said, to Jiraiya's wide-eyed astonishment. You mean to tell me you managed to fight Orochimaru long enough for the ANBU to interfere, and managed to trick him while fighting him? Jiraiya asked incredulously. Naruto just nodded at the man as they finally left the hot springs house. Ha ha! Jiraiya laughed out loud, wiping a tear from his eye. That is priceless. You managed to beat him at his own game. I bet he wasn't too happy about that, Jiraiya said with a smile, which caused Naruto to nod with a small smile. Well, I've things to do, Jiraiya-senin. Again, it was a pleasure to meet you, Naruto said as he bowed slightly to the man. Jiraiya smiled at the little genin. Tell you what, Naruto, I will train you in ninjutsu for the finals. What do you say? He offered. Naruto's eyes widened, surprised at the offer before they narrowed. Why? He asked as he moved to a more secluded place, the opening to a backwards alleyway. Jiraiya blinked. Why what? He asked back as if he could see no reason to question his motives. Naruto glared at the tall man. Why would you train me? Naruto said, his anger showing now that his mask had been removed. You know what I am? Naruto said with a glance away from Jiraiya, his hand clutching his stomach. And you could have any number of apprentices, Jiraiya. Don't fool with me, Naruto said, his anger rising as he looked back up to glare at the man, who had looked surprised about his little tantrum. Jiraiya narrowed his own eyes. I don't train just anyone, Naruto. Only those I think have potential to become strong enough to inherit my legacy, just as any shinobi with a name for themselves does, he said with anger behind his voice. His reasoning was sound, but Naruto was unconvinced. Why would you want me to carry on your legacy? Naruto asked, his eyes narrowed. Me of all people, he said slowly as if he couldn't believe it, shaking his head. It just seems odd, and I have to question why someone so powerful would be interested in training what most of this village tries to ignore, Naruto said sadly, his eyes dull as he looked down. Jiraiya sighed, disliking how Naruto talked. Just like I said, I recognize in you a power that is capable of surpassing what any could possibly comprehend, a power I hope you can use to its fullness," he said with complete faith in his words while smiling at the young man in front of him. "The QB," Naruto said with an odd note in his voice. Jiraiya smirked. "Not exactly, brat. It certainly is a trump card, but not the one I am talking about. You have something I see in you that makes it worth me spending my time teaching you. That is all I wish to tell you right now," Jiraiya said with a shrug of his shoulders. "If you aren't satisfied with that, then refuse," he finished. Naruto looked up at the man, his eyes searching Jiraiya's own as the two stared at each other. Naruto slowly allowed a smirk to cross his face. Who would turn down studying under the strongest of the Sannin? "I accept, Jiraiya-sensei," Naruto said, holding a hand out to shake Jiraiya's. Jiraiya smiled, shaking Naruto's hand while saying, "So you think I am the strongest?" he asked with a bit of arrogance in his voice. Naruto rolled his eyes. "Don't get big in the head, you're obviously the strongest, largest chakra pools, stamina almost equal to my own, capabilities with your Toad ninjutsu that even S-rank ninja are afraid of fighting you unless they're in groups. Only a fool would think you were weaker than that snake that runs from the slightest sign of trouble or your medic teammate, though she isn't much of a fighter anyways," he said with a shake of his head. Jiraiya nodded solemnly. "Very perceptive, Naruto. Many people think I am weaker than Orochimaru. Admittedly, if we were to fight, I don't believe that I could do anything but force a stalemate. That is still more than most can claim." Naruto shook his head and released his hand from Jiraiya's. Jiraiya nodded and pulled his hand back. "So, where should we start, Jiraiya-sensei?" Naruto asked. Jiraiya looked up at the sky, then back at Naruto. "Bring Kurenai to the village gates tomorrow if you can. We will start then. It is getting late and I want you fully rested," Jiraiya said as he began to walk away. Naruto sighed before turning and heading to his apartment, intent on eating dinner at home, then sleeping soundly for the first night in over a week. Scene break. As Naruto walked towards his house, the thoughts that had been pushed out of his head came rushing back, thoughts of the kiss Kurenai had shared with him. He touched his cheek softly, giving a soft moan as he imagined her soft and luscious lips pressed against him. He walked in a bit of a daze as he continued his march home, the feelings of that kiss running through his head and causing him to contemplate that which he had desperately tried to stop. Naruto thought about his teacher and only female friend as the woman she was. The hot, sexy, gorgeous, cute, funny, kind, gracious, comforting woman that she is. Her personality to him was second to none. She helped him in ways that he didn't even know he'd needed until after she had helped him. She was so supportive it made Naruto shiver to ever think of losing her valuable companionship within this village. She made him the happiest person in the village, and he could think of nothing to give back to her for her effort in being his friend and mentor. That was why the night when she had been hurt was so haunting to Naruto. He had discovered a new side to Kurenai that he hadn't seen. She had always been the solid base upon which he built his relationships again. It was because of her and Shikamaru that he was as strong as he was. When she had appeared in front of him, her eyes shattered to a point Naruto guessed must have been what he looked like when she first saw him without his shirt on. It had taken all of his willpower not to break down in front of her again. When she had dismissed him readily, Naruto had felt his heart sink, saddened that he couldn't help her, but she had then stopped him. She had invited him in and Naruto had comforted her like she had comforted him. It made a horrible night into one of the best nights of his life, because he had finally managed to help his friend to return some of the gratitude he felt towards her. That led him back to the dream where she had lain with him. He blushed as he recalled his hazy memory of how she had squirmed and squiggled herself into his side, almost curling her body around his in a comforting gesture as she snuggled into him. A radiant smile and an equally glowing blush took over his face as he recalled how happy he had been, as well as how comfortable her body had felt, pressed up against him like that. Again, that led him to the afternoon after, when he had woken up and then when she had laid her lips upon him. His blush deepened, a red worthy of Hinata before the Chunin exams brightening his face as he began walking up the stairs to his dingy apartment. Naruto started to climb his stairs, his mind still on Kurenai, from the bountiful raven-black hair that falls so messily from her head, to the curves of her body, hidden only by those tightly wrapped bandages, to her kind and caring personality that allowed her to befriend and train him, to those mesmerizing wine-red eyes that seemed to suck him in and hold him, making him try to enhance eye contact with her. Brat has a crush, huh? Kyubi rumbled out as Naruto heard it. He blushed but didn't respond. Did he like Kurenai as a girlfriend? Tisich, if you liked her anymore, I would be asking for a grave to dig for myself because of all the sappy moments you have in your pathetic head. The Kyubi trailed off as Naruto blushed deeper. Though, she is an adequate specimen of your species. Kyubi commented with a slight pause. You could have done much worse, brat. It said before returning to its slumber. Naruto didn't know why, but when the Kyubi actually complimented Kurenai, or at least complimented her in its own way, he felt much better about having those feelings for her, despite the fact that she would probably never see him as anything more than her student, even with that kiss. The kiss was just a thank you for comforting her. Still, Naruto could dream a bit, couldn't he? Scene break. As Naruto crested the final flight of stairs, his eyes snapped to the person standing in shadows near his apartment door. He was the only one who lived on this floor, so this person was definitely looking for him. So dazed from his thoughts of Kurenai that his bloodline didn't sense the person. Naruto immediately set himself on edge, his guard up and his body tense, looking at the person. Didn't Sandaime-sama ever teach you it is impolite to keep a lady waiting? Kurenai said with a small smile as she stepped into the light. Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his head, his body relaxing as his bloodline sensed her familiar chakra. Sorry, Kurenai. I didn't know you would be looking for me. I assumed you would be watching over Hinata-chan or Shino. Naruto said to her as he moved towards her. How did you find out where I lived? He asked curiously. He had never shown her his apartment for a reason. As homey as it was for him, he knew it looked like something a homeless person would live in, especially after having seen her apartment. Kurenai's eyes flashed and her hands clenched when Naruto mentioned Hinata's name. Naruto frowned and shook his head. Like I told Kiba-kun, he will get what is coming to him. A foxy grin made its way across Naruto's face. Of that you can be sure, he said with his whiskers deepening slightly. Kurenai looked down at him, smiling. I know, Naruto-kun. I know, she said softly. As for your questions, Hinata is resting comfortably and the surgery has completely healed her. She will be combat ready in 2 weeks. Naruto and Kurenai shared a smile, happy for their comrade's good health. Shino is training with his father to gain another hive and a clan technique he believes he will need for the coming finals. She explained. Naruto nodded. As for where you live, I told you we had all been briefed about all of the genin as Jounin-sensei. Didn't I? She asked rhetorically. Naruto smiled sheepishly. He had forgotten that. Kurenai giggled lightly at him. Naruto felt his cheeks flush and his heart flutter a bit as he watched her hide her lilting giggle with a hand in front of her mouth, while her wine-red eyes twinkled with mirth. So, I find myself without a team for the next 2 weeks, Naruto-kun, she said slowly, drawing her words out as if making their conversation last longer was a good idea. Naruto smiled at her, happy he could spend such a long amount of time for one-on-one training, hopefully anyways. And Shino has already stated he would not be offended if I continued to help you train, she said with a smile. He really wants to fight you, though, she added. Naruto smiled and nodded. Then he frowned, thinking of what he had done today. Kurenai-sensei. About training. Naruto trailed off. Kurenai looked on expectantly. I kinda got another teacher since I thought you would be occupied with Shino, he said fast and closed his eyes, expecting her to be angry about it. After a few seconds, he peeked back at her. To see her staring at him with an unreadable expression, he flinched back slightly. Who? She asked after a silence. Jiraiya-senin. Naruto asked more than said, as if that would make it okay. Kurenai blinked before looking at him. Why him? She asked, curiosity in her voice as her expression was still unreadable. I wanted some ninjutsu to use since I rely too heavily on Genjutsu and people will learn about that through the bingo book on the break. It was just for a trump card, he said as he looked down. I asked Kakashi, but he blew me off for Sasuke, he said quietly. I ran into Jiraiya-senin at the hot springs and he offered to train me. After I got to know him a bit, I accepted since I thought I was going to have to train myself. He explained. Kurenai's expression suddenly turned into one of silent resignation. So, you wish to become a ninjutsu powerhouse then? I assume you will use your genjutsu in conjunction with them, she stated as if she was being slighted. Naruto blinked, understanding flushing into his system as he registered her words. No, no, he said, waving his arms. I just need some ninjutsu so I am well-rounded. I know you have some too, don't you, Kurenai-sensei? He asked, to which Kurenai nodded hesitantly. I'm still going to be a Genjutsu specialist, just need to round myself out, and I will train with you more than Jiraiya if that is what it takes. You're the first one to teach me and the first to believe in me. I won't turn my back on Genjutsu and I will become a Genjutsu master, he stated vehemently, to Kurenai's now brilliant smile. Okay then, she said happily. Naruto sheepishly rubbed his head. Jiraiya-senin would like to meet you tomorrow at the village gates. Before we start my training session, can you make it? Naruto asked. Kurenai smiled and nodded before heading to his door. Naruto-kun, Kurenai said as she now looked at him with a gleam in her eyes. Naruto gulped. We still need to talk about your new look, she said. Naruto smiled hesitantly. Won't you come in, sensei? He asked. She nodded and the two then entered his house, the shutting of the door behind him sounding like a death sentence having been given. Naruto and Kurenai sat on his tattered old couch. Naruto had made some tea for the two to sip at as they faced each other. Naruto had been slightly ashamed that he only had chipped cups to offer his sensei, and now that he admitted it to himself, possible love interest, but Kurenai had quickly waved it off after commenting on how good the tea tasted. Naruto nervously glanced at Kurenai as she took another sip of her tea. They had been sitting here for a few minutes, but Kurenai hadn't attempted to start a conversation, seemingly comfortable enough to sit there and just sip at her tea for now. As she did this, Naruto's eyes were constantly darting around. The reason for this was that Naruto was experiencing what he had felt during the academy with Sakura. He was having a hard time keeping his eyes from locking on Kurenai's face and allowing him to stare at her as she sat there sipping her tea. It was a fight he had lost horribly with Sakura since he was so damn bored in classes, but here, he was keeping his interest on other things through sheer willpower, but he was starting to lose his control as his eyes subconsciously panned over to Kurenai's sitting form. Finally, after what seemed like torturous hours to Naruto, Kurenai set her cup down and faced Naruto. Her eyes panned around the room as she turned to face him. He missed the narrowing of her eyes. Your apartment is in need of some repairs, Naruto-kun, she said. Naruto smiled. I know, but I couldn't afford the repairs before now, and honestly, I don't need it fixed since I'm gone so much while I'm on missions, he said as he looked at his house. I haven't gotten around to it, he said with a shrug of his shoulders. Kurenai nodded. I see, well then, care to explain? She said as she eyed his body and longer hair. Naruto looked down, wondering what to tell her, especially since he hadn't told his Gigi the truth. When Kyubi actually spoke up, tell her the truth. She has helped you the most and she is obviously concerned about it. Just as Naruto blinked in surprise at the concern Kyubi had displayed, the thoughts of gratitude were quickly crushed by Kyubi's continuance. I don't want your instruction in illusions to waver. I have my pride as a kitsune to consider, and you cannot be inferior to any other illusion users. It stated in its arrogant tone. Naruto sweat dropped but agreed with the great kitsune. So, Naruto opened his mouth. While my team was in the forest of death, we were attacked by Orochimaru, he said, to which Kurenai nodded. She had heard his official explanation, but she knew Naruto was hiding something. Well, he hit my Kage Bunshin with something when I was escaping. I don't remember the technique, but I do know that it disrupted my chakra enough to launch me into my mindscape, he said, to which Kurenai's eyes widened slightly. I met the Kyubi. Kurenai tensed, looking at Naruto with some trepidation. It was actually quite civil as compared to what the world thought of it. Quite intelligent as well, if a bit arrogant, he said with a shrug, to Kurenai's slight smile at how he talked about the world's most feared beast. Watch it, brat. I may be stuck in this damn seal, but I can still make your life hell, the Kyubi yelled from its cage. Naruto grimaced slightly from the mental pain but waved Kurenai's questioning gaze off. It can communicate with me, but it can't do anything beyond that now that I'm aware of it, he said, leaving out that the Kyubi could give him a massive headache and some pains in his body. He didn't want to worry them since it was really nothing debilitating. After I met it, which resulted in the two of us coming to a understanding would be the best way to put it, he said, which caused Kurenai to narrow her eyes. A very limited pact which leads to me having a better access and limit to its Yuki, while it will stop the Yuki that has been interfering with my bloodline," he said, which caused Kurenai to give him a look of consternation. Naruto continued before she could speak against him. "According to the Kyuubi, the seal has been giving my bloodline its Yuki to heal my body, leading to this," Naruto said as he waved at his broadened chest, thicker and longer arms along with his hair. Seeing Kurenai's puzzled look, Naruto frowned. "My bloodline's regeneration from the Uzumakis, as you remember, right, Kurenai?" he asked, to which Kurenai nodded. "Apparently, instead of using my chakra to regenerate my body, it's been using the Kyuubi's Yuki because of the seal." Kurenai's eyes seemed to gain a glint of understanding. "As a result, it's matured some of my body past the age it should be, such as the longer arms and broadened chest. So far, I haven't seen anything to suggest it's been lying or hasn't told me the complete truth, so I believe it," Naruto said, to which Kurenai nodded. "Has anyone inspected the seal, Naruto-kun?" she asked, concern in her voice. "Gigi checked it earlier today and said it was completely fine. Another reason to believe the Kyuubi so far," Naruto said after having nodded. "So, my body will look a bit unproportioned for now, but I think this can be used as an advantage, so I'm not complaining," he said, until he felt his hair tickle his leg from its length. "Though I think I need to get a haircut. This hair is more annoying than I thought it would be when I went and had a bath today. I don't know how you stand it," he said as he looked down at his hair. Kurenai smiled at him, before shifting her body and leaning across him to grasp a bit of his hair in her own hands, letting the almost fur-like mane of hair to run through her hands as she said, "I think you should leave it long, Naruto-kun, it suits you," she said as her hands played with his locks. Naruto blushed slightly, the closeness of her movement along with an odd tone in her voice leading to his reaction, but nodded. "I still think it's too long," he said through his blush. Kurenai cast a sidelong glance at his face and her own smile widened as she whispered to him, "But I like it longer," she said quietly. Naruto's blush deepened and he nodded again, struck dumb by how close she was and the smell that was invading his nostrils. Naruto's eyes locked on Kurenai's face as her eyes transferred back to his hand, her attention solely on the feel of the hair in her hand. Naruto's attention was brought to her curly black hair, the scent of her fruity shampoo invading his nose. His eyes trailed from the top of her head to her creamy skin which stretched over her forehead. His mind quickly brought up the feel of her soft fingers upon his body as they had sparred. He shivered lightly as his eyes traveled down to her wine-red eyes, the same pair of eyes that had captivated him ever since their first meeting, even if he hadn't allowed himself to be conscious of that thought until today. Following the contour of her face, he saw her small nose expanding and contracting slightly as she breathed. Finally, Naruto's eyes spotted her luscious red lips, spotting a bit of her red lipstick sitting on them. Odd that her eyes didn't have any of her normal eyeliner, but Naruto brushed that thought aside. Naruto felt a compulsion come over him as his mind returned to the picture of her lips, those luscious and soft lips that had pressed themselves onto his own skin a mere week ago. His lips trembled as he remembered the softness and warmth that her lips brought to him. His heart leapt up into his throat as he saw her face turn to him, her hand falling from his locks and supporting her weight as she settled herself face to face with him, a scant few centimeters away. His mind seemed to blank out as Naruto saw Kurenai fully face him. Her lips opened to speak and, before Naruto comprehended what he had done, his face lurched forward, his lips capturing her own open ones in a sloppy, yet slightly passionate kiss. Naruto's eyes were open as he pressed his lips onto Kurenai's. He saw her eyes widen, but he decided to enjoy the feeling that he had missed for the past week, his eyes closing in pleasure as he concentrated on how her lips melded with his own. Her warmth was amazing as sparks flew in Naruto's mind, the softness of her skin frying his pleasure centers with feelings he had never fully experienced. Naruto breathed through his nose as his lips went into an almost instinctual dance with Kurenai's, his mouth opening slightly and slightly sucking on her open bottom lip. He moaned into the kiss as he slowly drew himself back, pulling Kurenai's lip with him for a scant second before letting go and opening his eyes, glazed over with the pleasure he had just experienced. Of course, once his eyes opened, he was met with Kurenai's own eyes, which led to him opening his eyes wide, a slight fear in them as he noticed Kurenai looking at him with some emotion he couldn't quite place in his pleasure-induced haze. His entire body tensed as he looked at Kurenai, wondering what her response was going to be from this, worried that she was going to tell him that he was a pervert and leave him with no teacher, worried that he was going to lose his first friend, and worried that the woman he liked would want nothing to do with him, just like with Sakura. Did you enjoy that? Kurenai's voice floated to him as she looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold a fire within them. Naruto's fear-filled nod was her answer. Good. Because, she said slowly as she rested her hand back down from touching her lips to supporting her upper body above Naruto's. Naruto waited, tensed for the rejection he felt was coming. I want to do that again, she said before her own lips crashed onto his eyes wide as Kurenai closed her own, reinitiating the kiss that Naruto had broken off. Naruto stared, wide-eyed at Kurenai for a few moments, until his brain registered those pleasurable feelings again and Kurenai sucked on his own bottom lip, moaning into the kiss herself. Naruto pushed his head forward, creating a pleasurable pressure between the two as their lips moved in circles, massaging each other's lips, and Kurenai sucked on Naruto's lower lip. The two remained lip-locked for a good minute before they broke apart, Kurenai's eyes half-lidded and Naruto panting from air. Kurenai's eyes locked with his own, a smile on her face as Naruto hesitantly smiled back, before asking, what does this make us? He asked, a slight tone of fear in his voice despite the two kisses they had just shared. Kurenai didn't even seem bothered by the question, as she laid her forehead against his own, both feeling their partner's breaths tickling their skin. What do you think? She asked quietly as she closed her eyes, that smile still on her face. Naruto was quiet for a few moments, hesitation setting in and fear of saying the wrong thing staying his usually blunt way of speaking. Before, boyfriend/girlfriend? He asked with a bit of trepidation and slight hope in his voice. Kurenai giggled. Is that what you want, Naruto-kun? She asked with some humor in her voice. And, dare Naruto hope, some acceptance and hope of her own. To be my boyfriend? She asked. Naruto gulped, his open eyes locked on her own closed ones. Noting the smile on her face, Naruto answered again, his voice no longer plagued with hesitation or trepidation. Yes, he said, his voice showing his will. Kurenai's smile widened almost imperceptibly. Then, she said, her own eyes slowly opening and locking with his own, her hand coming up and being placed in his golden locks once again. Your hair is staying just like it is, your new girlfriend likes it like that, she said as she ran her hand through his hair and nipped his lips with her own when she announced that. Naruto's hesitation disappeared. His tense body relaxed as his eyes shone with a happiness he had never felt before in his life. His hands came up behind Kurenai, wrapping them around her body. He crushed her to himself, Kurenai's slightly surprised yelp bringing a chuckle to his own mouth. Tears gathered at the edge of his eyes, but he smiled brightly at Kurenai as he said, Whatever my girlfriend wants, he said with the brightest smile he could manage. Kurenai seemed concerned for a few seconds before she smiled happily at him. The two embraced each other as they enjoyed being so close to the person they both liked. Naruto and Kurenai both had bright smiles as they meshed their bodies together, enjoying the feelings that such closeness brought to themselves. All too soon, however, Naruto felt the time wearing on and he slowly released Kurenai, allowing her to sit back up, withdrawing from him. He swiped the few tears away from his eyes, tears of happiness that he never shed, and smiled again at her. I think we should get to bed, Jiraiya-senin wanted us up kinda early tomorrow, he said, a small note of unhappiness marring his otherwise happy face. Kurenai's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded, standing up as Naruto did so. She and Naruto walked to his door, stepping into the Genkan one, and Kurenai slipped her sandals back on. She turned to Naruto, who looked saddened she had to leave, and a small grin worked its way across her face. She leaned down, pushing Naruto's head up with her own forehead. So their eyes met and she whispered again, that same tone which had sent shivers down his spine present, her breath tickling his lips. Good night, Naruto-kun. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as Kurenai's lips gently pressed against his own for a few seconds before they disappeared, and Kurenai's gleaming wine-red eyes were the last thing he saw before she disappeared in a shunshin. Naruto stayed standing there, looking at where she had disappeared for a few moments before he smiled, his heart soaring as he ran into his room and flung himself onto his bed, a happy sigh leaving his lips as he closed his eyes, drifting off into dreams filled with Kurenai's eyes and body. Scene break. Naruto woke the next morning, stretching his body with a happy smile stretched across his face. He went through his morning ritual, brushing his teeth, washing his face, making sure that he looked presentable before grabbing a comb that he had almost never used and meticulously combing it through his spiky locks, taking care of any knots in his hair. He put the comb down and exited his bathroom, heading to his room. He quickly pulled on his clothes, noticing that his now broader chest actually filled out his shirt better than his slightly smaller frame, somehow stretching despite the fact that it had been tight against his smaller, previous chest size. It felt quite comfortable against his wider chest. Naruto ate a quick breakfast consisting of a banana along with some oatmeal before looking at the time and walking to his Genkan, slipping his sandals on and opening the door, ready to go meet his two senseis at the village gate. He was stopped, however, as he saw his girlfriend, hand raised to knock on his door as he opened it. He looked up at her, slightly surprised before smiling. "Ohio, Kurenai-chan," he said. "Ohio, Naruto-kun," she replied, a small smile on her face. A small space of silence descended on the two until Kurenai spoke again. Can we speak inside, Naruto-kun? I need to talk to you about something," she said hesitantly. Naruto's smile turned into a grin and he nodded, stepping aside so she could step inside. Once she did, he closed the door and went to take his sandals off, but Kurenai stopped him. "This won't take long, Naruto-kun. Besides, we need to meet Jiraiya-sama soon," she said as Naruto looked up at her. "So, what's wrong, Kurenai-chan?" Naruto asked curiously. Kurenai took a deep breath as if steeling herself for something before she locked eyes with Naruto. "I don't want you to take this the wrong way, Naruto-kun." But she trailed off, suddenly looking even more hesitant, until Naruto reached out, gently taking her hand and grasping it. Giving her a reassuring look, she took another breath and spoke. "I would like to keep our relationship secret," she said quickly, causing Naruto to blink and tilt his head as if he was trying to comprehend what she had just said. When he finally did, his hold on Kurenai's hand relaxed, but he didn't let go. "Why?" he asked, a tone of hurt in his voice. Kurenai sighed and looked at him with a slightly hurt look as well. "What you don't really know, Naruto-kun, is that most ninja relationships are kept between the couple to avoid trouble," she said, sounding like she disliked this as well. "Our lives are so full of danger already. We have to worry about our own enemies day and night with very little time for rest. Just imagine if some powerful ninja suddenly started going out with another powerful ninja. Both of their enemies would be attempting to take hostage or kill their partners just to harm the other," Kurenai said with pleading in her eyes for him to understand her position. "Imagine if someone like the Yondaime would have publicly announced that he was marrying a kunoichi. Can you picture the amount of enemies that kunoichi would suddenly have?" she asked with slight fear in her eyes. "I don't have that many enemies, Naruto-kun, but I couldn't bear the thought of someone hurting you just to get to me," she said as she gripped his hand in her own. Naruto looked down, sadness in his posture as he shook his head slowly. After a few moments of thinking, he looked back up at Kurenai, eyes full of that emotion he had last night as he answered. "So, we can't show our new relationship out in public," she nodded. "But, in here or your house or when we are alone, is that okay?" he asked hesitantly. Kurenai smiled down at him. "Of course, Naruto-kun," she said as she leaned down and kissed him once again. The two kissed chastely for a few seconds before they broke apart, each holding smiles on their faces. "Okay, so I have to call you Kurenai-sensei in public," he said with a nod of his head, then let go of her hand. "Let's go meet Jiraiya-sen and then, Kurenai-sensei," Naruto said as he opened his door again, allowing Kurenai to step past him and close the door behind the two as they headed off to the village gates. Scene break. Naruto and Kurenai came into sight of the village gates just as the streets began to fill with people. Naruto was happy that they had avoided the majority of the population. He didn't want to mar his time with his new girlfriend, whom he quickly snuck a glance at with glares. Naruto's whole countenance spoke of his happiness. Even if he didn't smile, no one could miss the way he walked. It was eerily reminiscent of when he had accomplished some great prank on the village. Naruto noticed that Kurenai seemed marginally happier too, even if she didn't show it as much as he did. He noticed the slightly higher steps she took along with the incline of her lips as her wine-red eyes watched the road in front of them. She was also more relaxed than Naruto had seen her in quite a bit of time. Naruto's face broke into a grin as the two reached the village gates and positioned themselves close enough together to be acquaintances yet far enough to not be anything more. He was happy to simply spend some more time in her presence, which she seemed to share as she turned her eyes to him, flashing him a small smile before returning to her previous position. Of course, their quiet was broken when the two gate guards spoke. "Yo, Naruto," the voice cried out. Naruto looked up from where he had been standing, spotting two people he knew pretty well. He cast a glance at Kurenai before walking over to the guardhouse. "Ohio, Izumo-san, Kotetsu-san," he said with a small smile on his face. In the guardhouse were two people, both of whom were people who looked like older versions of the two kids that had been blocking the second-floor door back before the first Chunin exam test. Kotetsu was leaning forward, having been the one who called Naruto over, and Izumo was keeping a weather eye on the road leading to the village, obviously keeping his duty complete even as he waved to Naruto. "Ohio, Naruto," Izumo said in reply. "Kotetsu, you need to pay attention to the forest. I can't do this by myself," he admonished his partner. "Oh, lighten up. This is Naruto here. I want to know what changed him," Kotetsu replied as he turned back to Naruto. Even Izumo let an eye travel over to Naruto. "So," Kotetsu said as he raised an eyebrow in question. Naruto rubbed the back of his head. These two always appreciated his pranks, so he knew the two in an acquaintance sort of way. As such, they had always talked to him when they had some time, just giving him a bit of companionship with their limited amount of time. Of course, that hadn't amounted to much, but Naruto still liked the two immortal Chunin, as they were proclaimed by others. Actually, Naruto looked over his shoulder, looking at Kurenai, who was watching the exchange with an impassive look. Kotetsu grinned and Izumo's eyes widened as Naruto turned back to them. "I found a teacher, and she sorta took it on herself to change me," he said with a nervous chuckle. Kotetsu chuckled. "Good for you, getting Yuhi Kurenai, the Ice Queen herself. Man, you are one unpredictable and lucky son of a bitch," he said as he eyed Kurenai. Naruto flushed, thinking of the relationship he had with her that they didn't even know about. "Be careful, Naruto. She's called the Ice Queen for a reason," Izumo said as he eyed Naruto's blush, then turned back to the road. Naruto was slightly touched by the concern Izumo had for him. Though the two Chunin had never done much to help him, they had done more than almost anyone else, so this show of compassion was a bit surprising since Naruto hadn't expected it. Naruto looked at Izumo for a second, also feeling something hidden about that statement that he couldn't pick up on before he nodded. "Thanks, Izumo," Naruto said. Izumo turned and smiled at Naruto slightly. "Man, Naruto, you kicked ass in the Chunin exams, man, good job," Kotetsu said, causing Izumo to facepalm himself as he turned to watch the gates again, and Kotetsu watched Naruto. Naruto chuckled. "Well, it is all because of Kurenai-sensei's teachings. That Genjutsu was pathetic by the way, Kotetsu," he said as he glared slightly at the older man. Kotetsu looked affronted. "Hey! That Genjutsu was capable of fooling those weak little genins. How was I supposed to know you would get training by the Genjutsu mistress herself?" he defended. "Well," Naruto trailed off looking very serious. "I guess I can let it slide this time. Just don't let me find you making such weak Genjutsu ever again," Naruto said with a smile. Izumo couldn't hold his laughter anymore as he burst out laughing, leaving Kotetsu to huff and sit back in his seat. "I think I should rejoin Kurenai-sensei. My other sensei should be here soon," Naruto said as he turned and made his way away from them. When Kotetsu registered what he said. "Wait a minute. Who's your other teacher?" Kotetsu asked. Naruto just turned and smirked at the two as he continued walking forward, eventually reaching Kurenai's side and resuming his position from before. "I didn't know you knew Kotetsu and Izumo," Kurenai said quietly. Naruto smiled. "They talked to me and helped me out after some of my pranks," he explained. "They also liked my pranks, so they were nice to me. It just sort of evolved from random meetings to them taking some time out to come talk to me when they didn't have guard duty." he said as he closed his eyes. Kurenai didn't say anything else, and the two stood there for another 2 minutes before Naruto turned to the street leading from Konoha. Kurenai turned behind him just as Jiraiya's tall stature and white hair made themselves known in the middle of a crowd. Making his way towards them, his geta creating small tufts of dust from the dirt road. Jiraiya had a small smile on his face as he walked towards Naruto and Kurenai, his eyes almost instantly roving Kurenai's body. Sizing her up, Naruto narrowed his eyes as Kurenai unnoticeably bristled as Jiraiya approached them and greeted Kurenai. "Well, hello Kurenai-chan. It's been much too long since I was graced by your beauty," he said with a wriggle of his eyebrows. "Keep your eyes off my sensei Ero-senin," Naruto growled out, not liking how Jiraiya looked at Kurenai. Jiraiya looked down, a bit surprised at Naruto as Kurenai smirked at the nickname Naruto gave Jiraiya. "Tisich, can't a man greet a beautiful woman without being assumed a pervert?" Jiraiya asked with an innocent look on his face as his eyes discreetly darted back to Kurenai's breasts. "Not when I caught said man peeping in the hot springs just yesterday," Naruto retorted quickly, which caused Kurenai to narrow her eyes at the man. "Now, let's get to training before Kurenai-sensei puts you in her pervert Genjutsu," he said with a smirk as Kurenai grinned evilly. Jiraiya looked between the two for a few seconds, apparently deciding if he should risk it, and then shook his head. "Well then, let's head out, we will return before nightfall," Jiraiya said as he jumped into the trees, quickly disappearing into the foliage, followed quickly by Kurenai. Naruto turned, smirking at the gaping Kotetsu and Izumo, waved cheekily at them before disappearing into the foliage, following his sensei's chakra trails. Scene break. Jiraiya stopped by a river, the banks allowing for a clearing of decent size to be present even with all of the deep foliage surrounding the area. Kurenai dropped down next to him, her breathing slightly labored, but nothing that was immediately noticeable as she set her impassive gaze on Jiraiya. Jiraiya smiled at her. "A gaze worthy of your title, Ice Queen Kurenai," he said as he looked at her. "I wish I could say it is a pleasure to meet you, Jiraiya-sama, but I don't particularly like lying to fellow Konoha ninja," she said in response. Jiraiya just smirked, knowing the women's population didn't really like him. "Ah, don't be like that, Kurenai-chan," he said, wiggling his eyebrows. "I'm sure I could find some reason for it to have been a pleasure," he said suggestively. Kurenai blanched back, looking disgusted before going through a few hand seals, and Jiraiya was suddenly standing in front of her with a blank gaze while his eyes widened. Naruto dropped down next to Kurenai just as Jiraiya's hands shot up to his eyes and he started to scream. Naruto's sweat dropped. "How bad was he? I was only behind you guys by like 5 seconds," he said in an exasperated tone. Kurenai shrugged as she smirked at Jiraiya, who was now rolling on the ground in pain. This continued for another 3 minutes until Naruto looked at Kurenai. "Okay, Kurenai-chan, please release him. He may be a pervert, but he is still a good ninjutsu teacher. Besides, I need him to be able to teach," he said with a chuckle as Kurenai smiled at Naruto, before releasing the Genjutsu, and both Naruto and herself smirked at the suddenly quiet Sannin. "That was cruel, Kurenai-chan," Jiraiya said weakly. "A Genjutsu with Guy and Kakashi doing things. Extremely cruel," Jiraiya said as shudders racked his body. "That should stop you from doing such things in my presence, Jiraiya-sama," Kurenai said with mirth in her voice, though the tone of steel underlying it made her point. Jiraiya nodded emphatically as Naruto looked around. "So," Naruto said, drawing his sensei's looks, "what are we doing here?" he asked as he looked at Jiraiya. "Well, first," Jiraiya said as he stood up and patted himself down, "I need to know what you can do. That was the reason I had you bring Kurenai along," he said as he looked at Kurenai. Kurenai nodded. Naruto felt a bit nervous as he waited for Kurenai to give an evaluation of him. He hadn't ever heard of what Kurenai thought of his skills or what he could do. "We have been training mainly in Genjutsu, which is definitely his strong point at this time," she said as she thought deeply. "Obviously, he is capable of affecting multiple targets, something that Genjutsu users usually have trouble with because of the mental capacity, but he is capable of enrapturing more people than even I can, partly because he has the chakra but also because of the way his mind works. He is capable of multitasking to a point that I have never seen before," she praised as she smiled at Naruto, I'm a bit surprised that he was capable of using his own Genjutsu so soon. As his moniker states, that Genjutsu was much more chakra-intensive, and I have a feeling that Naruto more forced the chakra onto the bandits than actually invading their chakra coils. Any experienced shinobi would have been able to easily dispel it because of this, she theorized. Naruto looked down, a bit disappointed, but Jiraiya nodded his head. That was expected with moderate chakra control. Naruto knew how to implant the illusion, but he hadn't invaded someone's mind to do it, but merely altered their senses by forcing it over their own input. Something that was dangerous and unreliable, as ninja would be capable of sensing this and easily dispelling it. However, his chakra control has severely improved since then. I wouldn't be surprised if he was capable of taking on those thugs again by himself and being capable of doing the Genjutsu correctly this time, she complimented, which caused Naruto to smile and look up at her. What chakra control do you know, Naruto? Jiraiya asked. Surface clinging and water walking, but I managed to adapt the leaf floating exercise to suit my larger chakra. Would you like to see? Naruto asked, to which Jiraiya nodded. Naruto walked over to a bush, quickly pulling a leaf off of the bush. He put it on his forehead, sticking it to his forehead with chakra. He then pushed the chakra flow to below the leaf and slowly started to overload his chakra up at the top of the leaf, forcing it down and onto the chakra which was below it, making the leaf seem as if it had just moved down Naruto's face. I can do this with up to 6 leaves at this point simultaneously, Naruto said as Jiraiya's jaw dropped and Kurenai's eyebrows raised into her black curls. Jiraiya then smiled, as if he had won an award, and motioned for Kurenai to continue her compilation. He has made 3 of his own Genjutsu, more of which we are working on getting the hand seals down, but we have been waylaid until recently. Those Genjutsu in his arsenal make him almost as dangerous as myself with his cunning mind and the capability of casting Genjutsu with his more potent chakra. Of course, any experienced Genjutsu user will be capable of countering him, but anyone without a proper Genjutsu training will easily fall prey to his techniques, Kurenai said as she finished. Then, we trained his speed. He currently has weights on that are much heavier than I think they should be, but his body adapts incredibly fast. We assume this is because of the Kyuubi and his bloodlines, Kurenai said, which caught Jiraiya's notice. What bloodlines? He asked, a note of curiousness in his voice. He is from the Uzumaki clan, Jiraiya-sama, Kurenai began, to which Jiraiya held his hand up. Which ones do you have? He asked as he looked at Naruto. Sensor and body, Naruto answered after a pause. Jiraiya smirked, almost as if he had just hit a jackpot. He motioned for Kurenai to continue. Anyways, he is almost as fast as myself with his weights off, which means he is faster than anyone in the exam, except perhaps that Rock Lee, she said, to which Jiraiya nodded. So, you built him to be able to get away from his opponent? He asked, to which Kurenai nodded. Anything else? He asked. Kurenai thought for a moment before shaking her head. Only that he would be a solid Chunin level with some decent ninjutsu and a taijutsu style. As it is right now, he is a high genin level only because he is lacking in those 2 areas. She finished with a smile. Jiraiya nodded again. Anything to add, Naruto? He asked. I know Futon, Daitapa and Futon, Kamaitachi. Nothing else, he added as he looked at Jiraiya. How did you learn those? Kurenai asked curiously. Kinda watched Asuma-sensei perform them in team training one day and sorta picked it up, he said as he rubbed his head. You saw a jutsu once and managed to recreate it? Jiraiya asked. Naruto just nodded his head. That's impressive, brat. Even if the ones you copied aren't all that difficult, but still impressive, Jiraiya praised. Naruto smiled and even Kurenai nodded her agreement. So, any idea what type of jutsu you would like to learn? He asked. Naruto cocked his head to the side, slightly confused. What do you mean? He asked. Jiraiya sighed. I mean, do you want offensive, defensive, or supplementary? He asked. And do you want elemental jutsu or generic chakra types? Naruto's face turned down obviously in thought as he placed a hand to his chin. Naruto thought for a few minutes before Jiraiya seemed to get impatient. Do you know your chakra affinity? He asked. Naruto looked up, that confused look back. Kurenai sighed. He means that different chakra feeling that you would get if you stared at a chakra for too long, Naruto-kun. It's something I hadn't told him about yet, and I doubt Kakashi has told anyone other than the Uchiha about it, she said as she spoke to the both of them. Jiraiya frowned. Well, chakra affinities aren't usually trained yet, so Does your team already know their affinities, Kurenai? He asked, to which Kurenai nodded. Naruto frowned. Anyways, Jiraiya said, seeing Naruto's frown, chakra affinities show which of the 5 main elements that a person's chakra is most attuned to. The 5 main elements are fire, water, earth, wind, and lightning. These affinities also have a circular pattern that is associated with them in accordance with their weaknesses. In other words, fire is strong against wind, wind is strong against lightning, lightning is strong against earth, earth is strong against water, and water is strong against fire. Follow me, Jiraiya said as he drew the circle in the ground for Naruto. Naruto nodded as he studied the circle. So that's why Sasuke's and my jutsu caused such an explosion. My wind enhanced his fire, right? He asked, to which Jiraiya and Kurenai nodded with small smiles. Okay, he said. Now, even if you have a wind affinity, that doesn't mean you can't learn a lightning technique. It is just that wind techniques will come to you easier than a lightning technique. Understand? Jiraiya asked, to which Naruto nodded again. So, let's find out your affinity. Jiraiya then took out a piece of paper, handing it to Naruto. He said, channel some chakra into it. If it cuts, your wind. If it burns, your fire. If it crumbles away, your earth. If it gets soggy, your water. If it crumples up, your lightning. Jiraiya explained. Naruto nodded and sent a bit of his potent chakra into the paper. His eye went wide as the paper split right down the middle, his finger being pricked and causing him to drop his paper from surprise. Wind? That's pretty rare in Konoha. Jiraiya said. Only Asuma and Hayate have that, right? Kurenai asked, to which Jiraiya nodded. It explains why he was able to copy the wind ninjutsu though. She commented. Again Jiraiya nodded. Well, wind is usually used for close to mid-range combat. It is also the most offensive chakra affinity one can have. Jiraiya said, drawing Naruto's attention. Of course, most of the jutsu for wind are attacks. The defensive jutsu for it is extremely powerful because of the rarity. He said as he rubbed his chin. Of course, I think I know what I want to teach you, Naruto. He smiled at Naruto, who looked curious. I have a few defensive jutsu that require for my hair to be as long as it is. They are incredibly useful as no one ever really expects for hair to become a weapon, and the defensive jutsu I have would be very effective in allowing you to bypass physical attacks. I don't know why I didn't see that earlier. Jiraiya muttered to himself as the end. Naruto smiled as Kurenai smirked, sending Naruto an I told you so look about his hair. If you manage to perfect these, then I have one other thing I wish to teach you before the finals. Jiraiya said with a smile. Bring it on then, Jiraiya-sensei. He said with a grin. You may go now, Kurenai-chan. Thank you for the help and analysis. Jiraiya said to Kurenai, a clear dismissal from his training session. Naruto frowned slightly, but Kurenai nodded before jumping into the treeline and disappearing. Naruto following her chakra signature for a few minutes before she got out of range. Naruto turned to Jiraiya to see the man grinning at him. Naruto suddenly felt uncomfortable as Jiraiya spoke. You fancy her, huh? He asked with a bit of amusement in his voice. Naruto flushed but glared at Jiraiya. So what if I do? He asked with a blush still tinting his cheeks. Jiraiya chuckled. Nothing, he admitted as he held his hands up in defensive. Just be careful. If one of your enemies notices how much you like her, they will do anything to hurt her just to get to you. He said with a seriousness that Naruto hadn't seen up until now. Naruto's eyes narrowed over at Jiraiya, feeling like Jiraiya was talking about someone or something Naruto didn't know about. But ultimately, Naruto didn't say anything else about it. Why did you have Kurenai-sensei leave? He asked. These jutsu I use are not known anywhere else. They're not written down even in the Forbidden Scroll. Jiraiya said while frowning. Whom I teach them to are meant to be used by them and them alone. I expect you to refrain from teaching this technique to anyone else unless I give you permission or I'm killed, and you're then the only user of said technique. Jiraiya said with a gleam in his eye. I'm, essentially, taking you on as a temporary apprentice right now, Naruto, and I expect you to follow my rules just as I would follow yours for any genjutsu you would teach me that you had created. Jiraiya said, trying to make Naruto understand his point. By the nod of Naruto's head, he knew he got his point across. I'm not trying to be mean about it. I wish for my techniques to pass only to those whom I deem worthy, just as you, one day, will do the same. He finished, to which Naruto nodded. Now, are you ready? He asked. Naruto's happy countenance faded into a cold, impassive face as 5 Kage Bunshin appeared around Naruto before hopping into the foliage and positioning themselves in a radius around their temporary training grounds. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, watching the shadow clones jump away before smiling, seemingly pleased with what Naruto had done. Okay, the first technique I'm going to teach to you is the basis for the rest of these techniques. Watch closely. I'll demonstrate it only once. Jiraiya said as he began to go through hand seals. Naruto watched, along with his bloodline, as Jiraiya's chakra flowed through his body. Ramrat Snake, Hari Jizo 1. Jiraiya said as he landed on the snake hand sign. Naruto saw as Jiraiya's long hair stretched out even more, chakra flowing to the follicles on Jiraiya's head, causing the hair to grow and extend all over Jiraiya's body, so he looked like a porcupine of his white hair. The odd thing that Naruto felt was that the chakra that had been channeled to the follicles was now being channeled to Jiraiya's hair as well. The white hair spiked up as if ready to stab someone. Got a feel for the chakra usage, Naruto? Jiraiya asked. Naruto nodded as he watched Jiraiya slowly release the technique, his hair shortening and slowly resuming its previous length and position. Somehow the extra length just disappeared with the chakra being released. When his hair was returned to normal, Jiraiya looked at Naruto. Well, he asked. Naruto scrunched his face up and thought, I could feel you use chakra to stimulate the base of your hair to lengthen your hair so it covered your whole body. It was quite amazing, but what confused me is what is the use of channeling chakra to your hair like that? It just looks like you grew your hair to cover yourself. Naruto said, Very good. You're experienced in using your bloodline to determine attacks. Jiraiya said, to which Naruto nodded. Good, that is very useful in combat and will help to save you. As far as Hari Jizo is concerned, however, you were close in what you said. The purpose for channeling chakra to my hair is it gives my hair strands the denseness and resiliency of needles. These needles serve as a defense system which can block most metal and thrown weapons. It also awards a slight resistance to elemental jutsu. Jiraiya explained, to which Naruto's eyes widened. This was a very useful jutsu, especially if he got into close combat or had a long-range fighter that he couldn't dodge in time. Additionally, there is another jutsu that can be used while having Hari Jizo active. This is an attack that takes the hardened hairs and launches them at the opponent with similar damage as Senbon needles. The name of this attack is Hari Jigaku 2, and I will be training you in this once you have mastered Hari Jizo, he said. Naruto smiled, excited about getting such a versatile jutsu. Jiraiya smiled as well. You can see why I would want this jutsu to fall into just anyone's hands? He asked, to which Naruto nodded. The hand seals to Hari Jizo are Tiger Horse Boar Ram Rat Snake. Get to work, Jiraiya said, to which Naruto adopted a serious expression and began to attempt the jutsu for the first time. Going through the hand seals, Naruto built up what he felt was an appropriate level of chakra and released it with the jutsu as Jiraiya watched. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt his hair lengthening, covering his whole body. He smiled as he felt it cover his body, starting to direct his chakra into his hair. He felt his hair continue to lengthen until he was literally drowning in his hair. Naruto flushed as he stopped channeling chakra and his hair slowly withdrew back into himself, to see Jiraiya standing there with a smirk on his face. Jiraiya turned and began to walk away as he spoke. I'm going researching. Come find me when you have it mastered, he said as he disappeared. Naruto grumbled and set about learning his newest jutsu. Scene break. 12 hours later, Naruto was on his back, panting from the chakra he had just exhausted in trying to get the Hari Jizo to work properly. He was already close in figuring it out. His hair growth was not as long as before, but he still needed to perfect that before he could try sharpening his hairs. Naruto decided that it was time for dinner and that he was going to head home, so he slowly dispelled his clones, feeling the leftover chakra from them, refilling his reserves slightly as he stumbled to his feet and headed off to the direction his clones had sensed Jiraiya was researching. Interesting jutsu for a ninjen. Kyuubi spoke after having been silent the entire day. Naruto nodded his head, not really deigning to respond mentally. You will need to set aside some training days in the control of my Yuki for this pact to work. I will not have you wasting my power like that insane Tanuki. Naruto merely nodded once again as Kyuubi fell silent once again. Naruto found Jiraiya peeking through some bushes at some girls playing in their bikinis underneath a waterfall. Naruto rolled his eyes, deciding to let his sensei know that he was done training for the day. Naruto walked up behind Jiraiya and launched his sensei down the cliff and into the water, right next to the playing women. Naruto smirked and yelled, "Pervert!" before turning around and heading to his house, tired and ready for a hot meal before bed. As Naruto walked, he thought back to last night. It seemed unreal to him that Kurenai had liked him like that. Even though Naruto had never shown any interest in her like that until after her kiss, Naruto was happy she felt like this about him. It gave him a warm feeling inside his chest, and his heart jumped each time he thought about her. He didn't know exactly what this feeling was, but he knew he liked Kurenai just like he thought a girlfriend would be liked by a boy. So he had ventured out and asked Kurenai last night. He had been ecstatic about her acceptance. Even if he was a bit saddened he couldn't proclaim that he had her as a girlfriend out loud and to his friends, he was still happy about their relationship. Of course, Naruto was completely new to a relationship such as this, so he began to think of what he should do as Kurenai's boyfriend, the mere thought sending a fluttering to his stomach. He smiled as he entered the village proper, thoughts of what he should do floating around his head: flowers, chocolates, presents, dates. After debating about it, he decided he should take his new girlfriend on a date since they had never actually eaten together since the first night she had started to teach him. They had tea together, but it wasn't the same. Of course, that brought about the question of where they should go since they couldn't be seen in public together. Then Naruto grinned. He knew the perfect place to have some privacy and enjoy a night together. Naruto walked into his house with a smile on his face and plans for the next night already in his head.